challenge that has to be addressed is how do we actually reduce the carbon footprint while simultaneously increasing the supply of energy to meet the growing energy need. And I'm quite hopeful that today and tomorrow and the day after, over the coming 3 days, the participants will have an opportunity to hear a lot more about what the industry is looking to do in this area, and that all of the participants and the key stakeholders with the government and the regulatory bodies, we can have fruitful discussions to think about what are some of the ways by which we can actually meet Indonesia's energy needs while keeping a low carbon footprint going forward. So it's a really exciting time. I think the Congress has attracted a lot of participants, a lot of very good speakers, and I am quite hopeful that coming out of this particular Congress, that we all leave more engaged and have a better perspective of how to address this dual challenge and what are some of the solutions by which we can do that. And I'm glad that the IPA is the backbone and the mechanism by which this particular conversation can take place and providing the platform for such a discussion.
Okay, thank you Mr. Irtiza for the remarks. Selanjutnya mungkin saya akan persilakan Ibu Meti untuk menambahkan sepatah dua patah kata kepada rekan-rekan media yang hadir dalam press conference kita. Silakan Ibu.
Selamat pagi dan terima kasih sekali atas kehadiran rekan-rekan media di Konvek ini ya tahun 2022 yang menurut saya setelah 2 tahun masih penting banget ya. Dan bukan hanya setelah 2 tahun, tapi ini memang kritik di mana industri migas itu punya satu hal yang luar biasa. Ya, tadi Pak Irtiza sudah mengatakan bahwa pada saat kita harus menyediakan energi yang cukup melalui migas, kita juga harus menurunkan emisi. Ini nggak gampang. Tapi seperti tadi sudah dikatakan memerlukan kolaborasi. Jadi kami ingin menunjukkan melalui convention ini bahwa kolaborasi itu sedang terjadi antara pemerintah dan juga dengan para investor. Sebenarnya sejak tahun lalu pun pemerintah itu sudah bergandengan tangan dengan kami dalam membentuk bagaimana nih peraturannya gitu ya supaya pekerjaan besar menaikkan produksi sambil menurunkan emisi karbon ini bisa dilakukan kan harus pas ya peraturannya. Nah untuk itu pemerintah menggandeng para pemain migas ini untuk membicarakan hal itu. Karena itu saya merasa bahwa optimis ya bahwa dengan bersama-sama kita bisa melaksanakan atau mencapai kedua hal ini. Tentu hanya saja kalau menurut kami semuanya harus lebih cepat dan agresif, itu aja. Caranya udah menuju ke arah yang benar, tetapi harus lebih cepat dan agresif. Itu saja yang saya bilang. Nah, langsung ke ini ya, Pak Irtiza yang merupakan ketua dari panitia konvensi ini mungkin akan menjelaskan sedikit garis-garis besar dari 3 hari ini.
Terima kasih Bu Betty. Selamat siang rekan-rekan media semuanya. Terima kasih banyak atas kehadirannya. Saya info ke apa yang disampaikan oleh Bu Betty. Dalam 3 hari ini kita akan banyak berdiskusi mengenai isu-isu yang sangat krusial yang menyangkut di dual challenge tadi ya, sudah disampaikan bagaimana kita menaikkan produksi, bagaimana kita bisa menurunkan emisi ya. Seperti teman-teman lihat tadi barusan bahwa kita sudah memulai dari round table talk gitu ya, yang membicarakan mengenai strategi yang sangat penting. Kemudian akan diikuti oleh beberapa sesi lagi selanjutnya. Di antaranya nanti akan ada sesi yang utama di antaranya adalah mengenai partnership di dalam mencapai target produksi. Besok kita mendiskusikan spesifik mengenai CCS US, ya tadi sudah disampaikan Pak Menteri juga, untuk juga menekankan pentingnya itu. Jadi besok ada di hari kedua. Setelah itu kita ada pembicaraan mengenai natural gas sebagai fuel, transition fuel. Di dalam masa transisi ini gitu, di mana Indonesia juga memiliki cadangan yang cukup besar, itu akan didiskusikan. Selain itu, seperti teman-teman tahu, di bawah sedang berlangsung juga secara paralel begitu banyak kertas kerja atau paper teknik yang dibentangkan, termasuk ada poster ini ya, sampai dengan 3 hari mendatang. Lebih dari 100 makalah yang dibahas di bawah itu. Dan hari ini, pagi ini kita lihat bersama di exhibition kita itu cukup meriah gitu. Di luar dugaan kita gitu ya, karena setelah 2 tahun kita tidak mengadakan kegiatan ini dan kita mencoba mempersiapkan yang terbaik dari segi panitia, tapi kita tahu bahwa orang datang harus pakai antigen dan sebagainya ya, itu salah satu kendala barangkali. Tapi pagi tadi saya lihat begitu meriah dan terus berlangsung ya, persis kembali seperti sebelum pandemi. Itu menjadi salah satu penawar lelah yang sudah kami lakukan berbulan-bulan dalam persiapan. Saya rasa itu yang mau saya sampaikan.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Meti dan juga Pak Krishna. Now we would like to give another opportunities untuk rekan-rekan media. Kami persilakan untuk menyampaikan pertanyaan kepada 3 narasumber yang hadir pada acara press conference kita. Saya akan buka untuk 3 pertama terlebih dahulu. Silakan angkat tangan. Oke.
Selamat siang, perkenalkan saya Arafi dari Kontan. Izin bertanya, tadi kan sempat dijelaskan juga bahwa Indonesia punya potensi besar untuk kayak menjadi storage untuk emission khusus sisi dan sisi gas itu. Nah, ini kalau misalkan potensi di Indonesia itu sebesar apa sih Bu? Dan kemudian nilainya tuh kira-kira yang bisa didapatkan Indonesia dengan mengembangkan storage untuk karbon ini bagaimana? Kemudian yang kedua, ini kan salah satu hal yang akan dikejar pemerintah di tahun ini kan untuk mendapatkan partner invest di Masela, salah satu konsorsium yang sudah terbentuk kan saat ini INA dan Pertamina, dan masih mencari pihak lainnya, perusahaan lain. Nah ini bagaimana mungkin IPM melihat potensi di Masela, kira-kira perusahaan yang akan masuk nanti bergabung konsorsium bersama Pertamina dan INA ini apakah memang perusahaan asing gitu Bu, karena yang punya teknologinya, dan ini kan salah satu resiko di Masela itu juga mereka kan belum berproduksi komersial sehingga masih banyak ketidakpastian, seperti misalnya di blok Sekakemang gitu yang awalnya cadangannya prediksinya 4 TCF tapi ternyata nggak sebesar itu. Yang dikhawatirkan apakah mungkin Masela berisiko seperti halnya Sekakemang juga, dan menurut IPA bagaimana pemerintah juga mengantisipasi resiko tersebut gitu, karena di sini Pertamina kan bisa dikatakan juga menggunakan uang dari negara juga gitu Bu untuk mengelola Masela nantinya. Terima kasih.
Yeah, so I'll answer in English if that's okay. I did get the translation, so thank you. On the carbon capture and sequestration, Indonesia's current estimated CO2 sequestration potential is unbelievable amounts. I mean, when I say unbelievable amounts is that you could take every single CO2 emission that's taking place today in Indonesia, it's about 600 million tons of CO2 per annum. And if you only stored that in the sequestration capacity, it's hundreds of years of emissions that could be stored in the ground. And of course, once they're in the ground or deep into the surface, 2 to 3, maybe 4 kilometers below, let's say, seafloor or the Earth's surface, they can stay there for millions of years. Just like oil and gas is under the subsurface for millions of years, CO2 emissions can be captured and stored safely for millions of years. So Indonesia's storage potential is immense. It could actually store not just Indonesia's emissions, but it can easily store emissions from all around the region and more. That's how much storage capacity there is. The exact numbers require further study. There are estimates that really vary. Is it 10 gigatons? Is it 80 gigatons? Some estimates suggest that it could be up to 200 gigatons. And if you put that in perspective, Indonesia's emissions today are 600 million tons. So that's a fraction, a very, very small fraction of what the total storage potential actually could be. On your second question around Masela, I think that's best asked for companies that are actively looking at it, like Inpex. I think from an IPA perspective, a comment that I can make is more around fiscal terms and the attractiveness of the terms. Because every single project that the oil and gas industry looks to develop, it has a different type of a risk profile. Onshore development is vastly different than deep sea offshore developments. They're more challenging, a lot more tricky. And you have to have a fit for purpose fiscal regime that allows and attracts the investors to do that sort of development. Masala actually is a very prolific area. It's actually 10 trillion cubic feet of gas, and highly, what I would say is highly effective, meaning that it's quite good, but a lot of it comes down to physically where it's located. It is not onshore, it's really far offshore, and because it's so far offshore and there's no infrastructure there to really enable the development, it makes it that much more challenging to really develop. So it's really outside the box thinking has to be done to really enable that particular development. And I think from an IPA perspective, what we really look to promote is the fact that you have fit for purpose fiscal terms that then allow the investors to make that investment.
Oke, thank you, Mr. Irtiza. Ibu Meti ingin menambahkan mungkin?
Pada dasarnya IPA mendukung semua pengembangan yang baik ya, karena memang oil and gas kan kita tadi tujuannya untuk menaikkan produksi ya. Jadi kalau ada kesepakatan antara pemerintah dengan para investor sehingga suatu lapangan bisa dikembangkan, itu hal yang bagus ya. Jadi kami bisa mengatakan bahwa kami mendukung adanya suatu kesepakatan yang baik sehingga lapangan-lapangan yang sudah ditemukan maupun yang masih dieksplorasi itu bisa nantinya dikembangkan.
Baik, terima kasih Mbak Alfi dari Kontan, sudah cukup menjawab ya. Saya akan berikan kesempatan untuk baik.
Saya Ibu Rika dari media Citra.
Nama saya Ibu Rika
Dari media Citra Nusantara.com, media online. Bu, sedikit tadi saya sudah dengar sekilas ya. Berapa besar dampak setelah Indonesia memberikan kesempatan kepada investor yang masuk ke Indonesia untuk bisa bekerja sama dengan Indonesia selama ini. Kalau kita lihat di 2020 dan 19 sampai 20 itu sedikit mengalami penurunan sedikit karena akibat COVID ini lebih banyak yang stagnan. Nah, ketika COVID ini sudah melanjutkan, kira-kira dari pengamatan Bapak Ibu ini dampak apa yang mungkin bisa dilihat dari pertumbuhan produksi yang Indonesia? Mungkin itu saja. Terima kasih.
Betul, waktu COVID pasti ada penurunan ya, pasti ada slowing down lah juga karena ada beberapa hambatan untuk bawa orang bekerja gitu ya. Nah, tetapi tadi udah dibilang sama Pak Menteri bahwa dalam 2 tahun ini pemerintah berpikir keras untuk bagaimana menaikkan atraktivitas. Ya, memang masih terus dikerjakan, tetapi sudah mulai. Buktinya di tender-tender wilayah kerja yang baru itu kan sekarang ininya lebih bagus termsnya ya, baik dari segi splitnya maupun dari segi perpajakannya maupun dari segi aturan-aturan lainnya ya, dibuka fleksibilitas kontrak juga ada. Jadi itu hal yang lebih menarik. Saya tidak bisa mengatakan dampaknya langsung karena industri migas itu memerlukan eksplorasi dulu. Tetapi sudah dilihat tanda-tanda baiknya. Ada lebih banyak yang mengambil area dan sudah mulai kan eksplorasi. Tadi beberapa kali kita dengar ada premier dan ada beberapa daerah-daerah yang sudah mulai mau eksplorasi. Jadi paling tidak saya bisa mengatakan dampaknya sudah terlihat di reaksi terhadap penawaran wilayah baru. Nah itu. Ya, jadi memang oil gas itu nggak bisa ini hari diusahakan besok sudah ada hasil, no. Tapi dari pengambilan dan aktivitas yang mulai dilakukan kita rasa. Ya.
Oke, baik. Terima kasih Ibu Meti. Selanjutnya, oke, silakan. Oh, sudah ada mic-nya?
Saya Bernadette dari Reuters. mau tanya, ini ya Bapak Ibu, kan mengingat harga migas beberapa waktu belakangan sedang meningkat. Nah, ini seperti apa sih dampaknya? Apakah ini membuat investasi migas di Indonesia menjadi lebih menarik? Seperti apa KKKS menginvestasikan kembali pendapatannya yang meningkat akhir-akhir ini ke industri migas di Indonesia. Dan kalau saya tadi nggak salah dengar ketika panel sebelumnya, ada pertanyaan dari audiens yang mengatakan bahwa investasi migas di Indonesia itu dinilai stagnan. Nah, kalau Bapak Ibu sendiri setuju nggak sih dengan pendapat itu bahwa investasi di Indonesia, investasi migasnya stagnan, dan apa faktor yang menyebabkan stagnasi itu? Apakah tadi modal pendanaan masih menjadi isu, atau ada isu yang menyebabkan investasinya stagnan? Terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih. Mungkin saya akan beri kesempatan untuk Mr. Irtiza, nanti mungkin Bu Medi atau Pak Krishna bisa menambahkan.
An excellent question. I would say that for the oil and gas sector, because it is a very long cycle sector, meaning that once we start the exploration and determine that a particular location could be developed commercially, to then actually put steel in the ground, to then actually operating it, we would generally look at a 40-year type of time horizon. And so when oil prices go up or down, generally they don't necessarily impact the investors' decisions to invest or not to invest, because we're constantly looking for investments, and the industry is looking, because if we have a 30 to 40-year type of horizon. So the current high oil prices, I wouldn't say that they are either driving investments or not driving investment. I think that's sort of a review that we do, that's sort of continuous and ongoing process. What I will say though is that one of the macro situations that is occurring globally is that the oil and gas industry is thinking hard and fast about, particularly the major oil companies, around if we were to make greenfield investments today, and greenfield I mean new discovery, then development, and then you're producing it. And if today there was a discovery made in Indonesia, it would take a handful of years to determine if it's commercial. Probably by the first time you have oil or gas in terms of operations, is probably at best if you're really at least early 2030s. And then you go from there for another 30 years. The challenge the industry has is that there continues to be uncertainty around how much oil and gas demand is going to be in the world. Is it low or is it very high? And as that uncertainty grows, it makes the decisions that much more critical. And one of the things that we look for, I think we look for sanctity of contract. You want to make investments in areas where you have predictable investments. Second thing you look for are most attractive fiscal terms. Like where are the areas globally that you have the most attractive terms? And the third thing you have to look for is how quickly can you actually develop the asset. And in that quick decision is also around how cost effective is it. Is it cost is super high or is it super low? And so, for example, like when we talk about some of the opportunities in Indonesia, they are in a more challenging areas. They're offshore. That means the risk is higher. That means the cost is higher. That means the fiscal terms have to be that much more attractive for that development to then play a role in any company's growth portfolio. In Indonesia, the investments being stagnant there's no one factor that is kind of driving that stagnation. It's a combination of the things that I have highlighted to you around the things that the investors look for. But one of the things that's very positive about Indonesia is that it is probably one of the least explored globally. With all of the archipelago and all of the potential for exploration, it's tremendous potential relative to the rest of the world and many other locations globally. And so there's an amazing potential to actually continue to do further exploration and then go develop those sort of areas. And I think that's what Butuh and ESDM, I think they're generally focused on is how to attract those investments and how to offer fiscal terms which are attractive to bring the investments and to really be able to explore. And I mean, I'll make my last comment around here is that some of this stuff has to be done rather urgently. Because if it doesn't get done in the next handful of years and exploration doesn't take place, and because it's a long cycle business, If you're starting to explore in the 2030s, you may not necessarily develop those reservoirs. But if, as the demand is very, very high, if you are able to do this study now, identify the locations, fund them, then you still have probably a better chance, much better chance of developing those oil and gas resources.
Oke, thank you Mr. Irtiza, elaborasi yang baik untuk pertanyaan ini. Mungkin terakhir, karena waktu kita terbatas, yang mana? Oke, jadi kunci saya, please. Okay, do you have the mic? Oh, okay, already.
Hi, Mark Russo, corporate reporter for Energy Intelligence. Maybe a question on CCS. I would like to understand exactly what companies need in terms of regulations and legal framework for that to be viable, technically and also economically. That's also very important, obviously. And maybe a question also on what ExxonMobil is planning to do. There are many MOUs that have been signed with Britannia, etc. What are you looking at doing basically in the country specifically? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Irtiza, please.
Thank you for the question. When it comes to the policy and regulation, I would say that some of the work that Butuh, particularly DG Migas, has been doing related to the regulation is actually very, very good, some of the draft regulation. I think there are several areas that could be essentially added to the existing sort of draft regulation. One of the things that I think that has to be accounted for is the best carbon sequestration locations are actually saline aquifers, which generally are on the sides or below the oil and gas reservoirs, the source rock, where we produce oil and gas from, or depleted oil and gas reservoirs. Those can generally maybe store up to about 5 to 7% of carbon, and that's it. But the rest of 95 to 93% of the CO2 that can be stored is in what's called saline aquifers, and these are generally below, even much further below the oil and gas reservoirs, so 2 to 4 kilometers deep. So one of the elements that is kind of missing in the regulations, and I think some of it's like maybe even globally, is to ensure that saline aquifers are part of this. Now, one would ask, like, why aren't they there? Well, the reason they're not there is for most countries, the oil and gas ministries, generally, they have governance rights only to the oil and gas reservoirs, not the saline aquifers. So I think that's an understanding that has to be developed at a very strategic governmental level, at the states level, that then has to advise basically the ministries to ensure the saline aquifers, where you actually have 95% of the capacity, because that's where, where CO2 can be stored. That's where those become part of the regulations. I think specifically for Indonesia, I think there has to be an openness to be able to have both domestic and international source CO2. I think that the international source CO2 would effectively finance the value chain, because domestic CO2 capture and sequestration, it's a lot more challenging to be able to fund. Like in an economy like Indonesia, either it's the people that have to pay for it, it's the government that has to pay for it, or the private sector pays for it, but the private sector goes and seeks the incentive from the government to run this value chain. And that cost in the early days could essentially be borne by parties from outside of Indonesia who actually have either the GDP or, frankly, the financial sort of capacity to be able to, let's say, activate that value chain. ExxonMobil's focus in the lower carbon space is multifaceted. One is carbon capture and sequestration. I'll come back to that in a second. We're very actively taking a look at hydrogen. We're heavily investing in ammonia. And the fourth area for us, our focus is biofuel. In the CCS or CCUS space, my responsibility is Asia Pacific, and of course globally as well. We're looking to identify high concentration CO2 emissions. Where do they take place? Those are generally in highly industrialized locations or highly industrialized complexes. Capture the CO2, aggregate the CO2, and transport the CO2 to a location where you could sequester it economically. Indonesia and Southeast Asia does present one of the best locations. Between Indonesia and Malaysia, you probably have somewhere between 50 to 80% of the total carbon sequestration capacity in this region. That is very, very significant. And I think if there are elements of first mover advantage that Indonesia could do by having in place the right policies, which would enable essentially investment in this particular value chain.
Okay, thank you Mr. Irtiza, Bu Meti, and also Pak Krisna for joining this press conference. Dan juga untuk rekan-rekan media, terima kasih sudah bergabung di press conference kita pada siang hari ini. Sebelum saya tutup, I would like to invite Mr. Irtiza, Ibu Meti, dan juga Pak Krisna to taking photo session yang akan diabadikan oleh rekan-rekan media. Kami persilakan untuk mengambil tempat bagi rekan-rekan media. Ya, IPA Convention and Exhibition berlangsung selama 3 hari sampai dengan tanggal 23 September. Setelah hari ini resmi dibuka dan juga diikuti dengan panel diskusi yang pertama. Jangan lupa untuk rekan-rekan semua, khususnya rekan-rekan media, untuk bisa mengikuti banyak talk show atau diskusi lainnya. Untuk panel berikutnya akan ada sesi teknologi session di Assembly Hall dengan Public Energy Transition and CCUS Program pada pukul 14 sampai dengan 16 waktu Indonesia Barat, dan juga special